Every time you invite change into your life, anytime you want to grow, expand, whether it's challenge a belief, whether it's change your routine, whether it's move, anytime you embark on any kind of journey or transition, grief is going to come along with you on that journey. And the problem comes in because we as a society, as a culture, as a family unit, we have not developed healthy coping strategies for all of the aspects that come with grief. Some of us know how to lean towards one emotion that comes with grief, i.e., anger, but we don't know how to deal with the sadness. We might not know how to deal with the fear. We might not know how to cope with the betrayal that comes from grief. So when we think about taking that step, admitting we're unhappy, quitting our job, even if we're going towards something better, even if we're heading towards greener pastures, if we are not ready with healthy strategies to deal with the grief that's going to come, we are going to feel blindsided. We might even feel like, oh my God, I made the wrong choice. When in reality, there is no choice that spares you from the grief. Welcome to What the Hélène, where we explore the journey from high-functioning burnout to full-bodied freedom for the ambitious rebel who has outgrown the hustle. I'm Hélène Kaniak, your guide in reclaiming your personal power, confidence, and your voice without burning out or burning the entire world down, which is very tempting sometimes, I promise. I know that. We're going to challenge the commodification of suffering, embrace the revolutionary act of pleasure, and try to dismantle the systems that suppress your self-trust. So, what do I mean by grief? Let's define it a little bit. In general, any definition of grief that you have in your mind right now will do. The dictionary will define it as immense sorrow after a loss, but to me, it isn't just sorrow. In my work as a mindset coach, when I've worked with clients both in the past as a criminal investigator, when I've worked with trauma-informed practices, grief tends to almost always come up in some capacity. Because we tend to think of grief as like this loss of another person or the loss of something else that was important to us. One of the things we end up grieving the most is not actually another thing. When we leave a job, when we leave a relationship, when someone passes away in our life, the sad thing is we don't just lose that. We lose the identity of who we were when we had the thing that we lost. When I talk about the grief that I experienced after getting out of the military, essentially quitting my job, right? If I were to just tell you I grieved that experience, you might think that meant I regretted my decision. That couldn't be farther from the truth. And the things I missed had nothing to do with the military. However, I was grieving an aspect of my life and who I was and the success I had earned and being good at something, like getting to a point where you're really good at something and having to walk away triggers grief. Oh my God. Like, I left when I could have just kept going and ascended higher. So not only did I leave what I felt like was the pinnacle of my career, but I also knew I was walking away from all the potential to lead at a higher level. And so those are at least two things I'm grieving. I could never walk onto that military installation again because of how access works. When I left the military, I was excited to get out. I did not want to spend any more time there. It did not suit me for so many reasons. I made the right choice in getting out. I was excited to just be coaching full-time instead of part-time. I was excited to go back home to see my grandmother and to be closer to my family, to move into the house that I owned, to have a garden, to be able to spend more time with my dog. And I was still blindsided by the grief that came from quitting this job that I did not like. So literally, it felt more like a divorce than it did a job loss, because much like in a divorce, it's not even about whether or not this was the right or wrong decision for you or whether or not you regret walking away from the thing. There's a whole life that you have lived up till that point. There are inside jokes that you have. There are aspects and memories of your relationship that have ties to a specific location or a specific city or a time in your life. There are all these reminders of a past version of you and a past version of you that made all the choices to put yourself in that position that you have to come to terms with. And because you are walking away from the version of you, you have to grieve that version of you, which means all of the emotions of grief are going to come along for the ride. So as I mentioned, grief is not just sorrow over a loss of another person. And it is not just sorrow. It is anger. It is sadness. It is fear. It is betrayal. It is shame. It is guilt. It is resentment. It is all the emotions that maybe up until now didn't get a chance to be fully processed. And I think this is why every time we are activated into feeling grief, it tends to tug on every other past iteration of grief that we've known. There's actually a very good chance you're grieving something right now. If you're looking at the current state of the world and you're seeing the tragedy, you're seeing the resistance, you're seeing protests, you're seeing tyranny. In every one of those instances, you might be feeling angry, you might be feeling sad, you might be feeling depressed. And I would submit to you that you are not feeling those things in a vacuum. You are not just angry because someone is doing something hurtful. You might also be grieving the fact that this country, this world, this life that you are living is not the one you thought you would be living at this time, right? It's like the state of the world is not what I thought it was. This is why it's so normal for us to experience almost secondhand grief. Almost like a big ball of yarn where the string is connected to every other ball of yarn that we've experienced in our life, everything that we've ever grieved. And when we are in a position to witness and be witness to someone else's grief, whether that's supporting a friend at the funeral of someone they loved, or watching the news and seeing tragedy befall other people. Anytime we're witnessing that kind of secondhand grief, it's gonna tug on our own. It's gonna hurt like hell. And depending on how well we have learned to cope with our own experiences of loss, of grief, of regret, of sadness, that is going to reflect how well and how intensely sometimes we process this newfound grief. How entangled does it become with everything we maybe haven't processed up until that point? When people think of grief, sometimes they think of the 5 stages of grief: denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. And they confuse the 5 stages for the 5 emotions that become grief. And those are not the same thing. So when they talk about the 5 stages of grief, what we're really talking about are how you might move through the start of your grief through the end of your grief. I have some issues with the 5 stages on a personal level because I find that if it is going to be something we move through, I do find that it is a wave in a big ass ocean where the current is unending and out of our control. So even though you may pass through one of the biggest tidal waves and tsunamis of grief in your life, that does not mean that you do not feel the ripple effects of that grief every day going forward. So I lost my mom, who passed away 11 years ago when I'm recording this podcast. And that is not to say I do not still miss her to this day, and I do not still actively grieve her in certain circumstances where her memory is fresh. Or if I hear my friend lose their own parent, or if I watch a TV show, something like Gilmore Girls, where the relationship between mother and daughter is very intense, those experiences tug on that string. Now, that string is no longer a big ball of yarn because I had to process my grief and spend a lot of years working through it and feeling my way through it, but it's still going to tug on that. And so I'm never going to deny that grief ends, right? But I do think the heaviest experience of it feeling like a jumble can be mitigated by learning coping strategies that allow you to detangle some of the emotions, that allow you to seek support, that allow you to do the introspection that actually turns grief into this incredibly transformative process. It's not just about the grief that comes from growth. It is also about the growth that can be had from grief. The powerful transformation and transmutation of our own fears, of our own sorrow, of our own anger. All of that potential energy can be turned towards something that we desire more for ourselves, something in our higher and better interest. But the only way we can do that is by feeling our way through the grief, is by listening to it, is by sitting with it and getting the appropriate support so that we don't feel like we're sinking into a pit of it all by ourselves. So while those are the 5 stages of grief that you move through, if it helps you to label those phases and feel like, okay, I'm past anger, I've moved on to bargaining, if that's very supportive for you, rock on with your bad self. Here's how I view grief. I view grief as a tunnel that we have to move through. The only way out of this tunnel of grief is through. But the tunnel is dark. It is scary. The edges are rough. There are some pieces where we might have to move through the tunnel standing, and some of it we have to get through by crawling on our knees and hands and knees. And the reason it's so important to have a community and support as you're moving through grief is those kind of stand in as the people at the other end of the tunnel that are shining the light for you and saying, hey, you're not alone. Put your handhold here, put your handhold there. Like, you're going to keep moving 2 steps forward. And you can move as slowly or as quickly through that tunnel as you want to, but you have to be moving through it. You cannot just close your eyes and completely dissociate your way out of it. You can do that, but one day something's going to make you open your eyes, and you're going to feel the repercussions of what it's been to be trapped and buried underneath the earth. And it's not going to feel good. If you're not following that metaphor, that's okay. Grief is a tunnel. The only way out is through. The only way out, when it's especially dark, is feeling your way through. If you were to close your eyes right now and picture yourself in a dark tunnel where you could not really see where you were going, you would have to literally feel your way through the edges of the cave and move forward at your own pace, right? The problem is, in a society where we're always rushing people onto the next productive thing because we've tethered their worth to productivity, we have learned to rush this grief process. We've even turned grieving into a process, but we haven't actually created any of the emotional container that is required to let people feel their way through and move at their own pace. Even taking something as simple as the loss of an individual. We think once we've held the funeral, we've held the wake, we've brought them food, we've put the person in the ground or buried them in some capacity, boom, like we get to move on with our lives. But because this grief is a rolling wave of emotion that's going to come through in different phases and hit you in different times of your life, what we need really isn't just a one and done container to process the grief, like a funeral or a wake or a celebration of life. What we deserve to create is a culture of support where not only loss gets to be felt, but sadness gets to be felt, where depression gets to be felt, where anger gets to be felt in public, because there's nothing more powerful to processing pain than allowing it to be witnessed, which is why one of the key elements that helped me process the grief of losing my mom is like a grief counseling group that was put on by the University of Pittsburgh. I decided to join after I'd spent 6 months crying myself to sleep. And I felt badly for my roommate because I was like, this girl cannot keep hearing me cry every night. Like literally my guilt for keeping her up at night, which I don't think I was, but I thought that, right? My guilt around keeping her up at night drove me to finally seek help. And I went to which was a huge deal at the time, right? Because I was not vulnerable up until that point. And the one person I would have been vulnerable with, aka my mom, was super dead. So who do you cry to when the person that you would cry to and talk to about it is gone? This is another reason why it's really important to diversify your portfolio of emotional vulnerability and support. Because God forbid you can't access the person you need to talk to or something happens to them. We all deserve to have multiple people that we can reach out to and seek out when we are feeling like we are in need. Because there's no shame around that. But at the time, I didn't believe that, right? I thought there was a lot of shame in seeking help. But I finally reached out to the university and they had this grief counseling and it was in a group format. I was a little wary at the time because I was like, well, I don't know. I have a hard enough talking about anyone with my mom. I don't know if I can talk to a group of people. But I convinced myself. I was like, Hélène, you're a productive capitalist, right? Like, how much could you be of service to others by showing up and by helping them be more productive in their grief? And I was like, oh, I'm a great person. I'm sure I can be very helpful to other people if I show up to this group grief counseling. So naturally, I show up and I'm surrounded by maybe 7 other people, other students, college students who had lost their parents at the time. It was just so significant to feel like I was in a container where I could speak my anger, my sadness, the resentment. It's really hard to talk about grief to other people when you want to say negative things about the person who's gone, right? Like when your situation of grief is like, oh, they were wonderful and I'm sad they're gone because they were wonderful. That's only one aspect of it. There's all the other things that they did that drove you fucking crazy that now you feel like you can't talk about because to do so feels like desecrating the dead person. I don't believe that's true, but I think it's all the more reason having a container of other people who are actively grieving with you normalizes the experience that grief encompasses multitudes, because when you are grieving an identity and we as people encompass multitudes, it makes perfect sense to me that you are not just grieving the good parts, you are grieving all the things that drove you nuts. You're grieving all the things that hurt you. You're also grieving the betrayal. You're grieving the depression and the angst and the guilt and the shame that was tied to that identity, whether it was another person, but also you're grieving the identity that you had by virtue of knowing that person, right? My relationship with my mother was unique. No one else can have the relationship that I had with my mother because that was a product of me and her, and she is gone. So I'm not just grieving her, I'm grieving my relationship to her. I'm grieving who I was in her presence. And now I'm also grieving the life that I'm currently living that is not what I thought I would be living right now. right? My mom is not around in this moment. So who I am today is not who I thought I would be back in the day. I am also naturally grieving the version of me that doesn't have my mom anymore. The present day and future iteration of Hélène that no longer gets to continue to grow up and to have life experiences with her mom by her side. So this is why grief is fucking heavy, guys. It's a lot because you're grieving all of that. And we don't give people room for it. We don't give people space for it. And so thank goodness I had that community of fellow students to help me practice talking about it. It was important that as an external processor, I had a place to communicate what I was going through. Because before then, literally, I couldn't talk about my mom. And that was so sad because she was amazing. But anytime someone asked me about her or someone else's mom came up, I would just start sobbing. And that is not a great way to communicate if you can't get your words out. Because I was not a crier who could talk and cry at the same time. I could only cry or I could talk, but I could not do both. So grief isn't just pain, it is also regret. It is also resentment. It is also disappointment. There's so much disappointment in grief. Again, with this notion of what you thought even losing the thing would feel like and what it actually became. An example of that disappointment, for instance, is when I got out of the military, I thought I would immediately get out and feel this immense joy and happiness of having been freed of the shackles of something I did not like or approve of. And while I felt free, I also had to deal with other aspects of the transition that complicated the joy that I thought I wanted to be feeling, because I forgot how much of my joy had been built on connection and clarity of purpose. It's easy to create joy when you're in a fixed area and container, but when I got out of the military, I wasn't in a fixed container anymore. I moved. I got out and I moved. So I changed cities. I moved to a city I'd never lived in before. I had no friends. I had minimal family that I wasn't that close to at the time, but also didn't necessarily provide emotional support. And I had to rebuild hobbies. I had to learn what it was like to, coach full time and be an entrepreneur full time. I also wanted to be frugal. And so by virtue of being frugal, I didn't go out, which means I didn't explore, which means I didn't make connections, which meant I ended up falling into a pretty deep depression. And that depression state of grief lasted a very long time because I had forgotten that the solution to grief isn't practical abstinence of expenditure. You also have to incorporate pleasure along the way. Like, pleasure is required. This is very similar to burnout. Spoiler alert, if you've ever burnt out or felt burnt out, you have grieved, because burnout is what happens right before you start grieving. It is kind of both the combination of the anger and the depressive stage of grief at once. Because what is it? Putting your all into something and then not getting the result that you want, right? Putting it all at work and then being like, oh shit, I actually don't have more energy. I don't have more praise. I don't necessarily have more money. And even if I have all of those things, I'm not feeling as happy and fulfilled by those things as I thought I would be. Do what we call burnout. But just like with burnout, when I'm talking about grief, besides feeling your way through it and admitting it out loud that it's happening and recognizing the signs of it, hopefully through other people who can help see you and witness you in your pain, the way that we grow through it, not get out of it like a get out of jail free card, but the way that we grow and move our way through it is incorporating pleasure along the path. We cannot just deny ourselves the things that brought us sadness. We have to also incorporate the things that brought us joy. And say that again. We cannot just eliminate the things that made us sad or mad. We have to also include the things that bring us joy and pleasure. This is the problem I struggled with when I got out of the military. I had gotten rid of everything that made me mad. But when I moved and got to Cleveland and I was like, all right, I'm going to button up. I'm going to move in real quick. I'm going to get a hold of my finances. I'm not going to spend a dime for the first few months. I'm just going to see what my budget in Cleveland looks like. I stayed in the house. I made no social connections. I didn't make any gentle acquaintances. And I really prioritized, my family, my grandmother, my dog, things that were very insular. Unfortunately, those things were inadequate in bringing me joy and pleasure. I'm someone who gets a lot of joy out of interacting with other human beings. And because I also not only took a break from the military, I decided to take a break from coaching. I didn't even get the purpose and the fulfillment out of the job that I had just transitioned into. I gave myself such a strong and strict sabbatical that I actually cut myself away from my purpose. So I was cut off from the sense of meaning that I had built up for myself. I also cut away any chance at connection because I was staying home for the name of frugality. And when I talk to other folks who have gotten out of the military or who are going through very big transitions, whether you're thinking about quitting a job, getting out of a relationship, moving to a new town, or even moving a home in a different city within the same kind of region, the two things that people struggle the most with and the things that people are afraid to walk away from are purpose and connection. Every time. Now, if you're tangled into the financial piece of it, a lot of people will say, well, I want financial stability. Well, why do you want financial stability? Right? So that you can keep meeting your connection, so you can keep supporting the family, and so you can still feel purposeful because God forbid you don't provide to another person in this life. What would you feel? Probably useless, probably worthless, probably like your life had no meaning, because what good are you if you're not providing for another human being, right? What's all this potential that you have within you if it's not there to be used? Right? So when we feel like a lack of us doing something is inherently a waste, no wonder we fear taking choices, because when we are afraid to change, we are also inherently afraid to move through every aspect of grief. So this is why I think burnout is really a couple of the stages of grief manifesting themselves early. We are pre-grieving the situation. And what keeps us from taking that big jump is we're afraid to face the other aspects of grief, like acceptance, right? So when we stay in denial a little too long, that's when we find ourselves burnt out for longer than we should. I think burnout is a great Kickstarter to grief. So just like in grief, there's a lot of clarity to be found in burnout. There's a lot of transformation to be found there. The more deeply you allow yourself to feel every aspect of your grief, the faster you will move through it. Just like you're back in that tunnel, the sooner you are willing to make contact with the world around you, but also get dirty with it. Really, if you're in a dark tunnel, this might be a gross process. You might really literally be feeling your way through this sewer, right? And the sooner you're willing to make contact and get in there, the faster you'll move through that tunnel. But you are not alone in that. And that's every time what I want to reiterate. You are not alone. There are other people who have grieved. There are support groups. There are certified life coaches. There are therapists out there. But even barring all of that, the first witness to your grief is going to be you. And so the first thing you can do is asking yourself, am I grieving something, right? What, if any, stage of life right now am I in that is not where I thought I would be? Like I mentioned before, am I upset when I look at the news, not just because it's upsetting to me, but because this life in general is disappointing me in some fashion? And that's okay. Be mad at life. Be disappointed at life, right? Bargain with it. Deny it all you want. But first witness and notice how you're feeling. Accept that that is the way that you are experiencing life right now. If you are not feeling a way that you expect to be feeling right now, you are grieving a version of yourself that you did not get to become. You're grieving the version of you that did not get to exist. That is normal. It's so normal, especially in a culture that prioritizes growth and achievement over all. That means you have to inherently leave something behind every time you take a step forward or higher. You have to walk away from that tree to get to the next one, right? And so depending on how attached you are to that tree or that view or that environment, that step is going to be a lot harder to take. And the sooner we normalize the fact that there is going to be a period where you look back at that tree and say, God, what if? God, how much I loved that tree. God, how much I missed that tree. God, how much I loved that tree at the time, but now I fucking hate it and I want to move on from it. We need to give people grace in that experience. I think a lot of us right now are grieving a version of a country that we did not sign up for. We're grieving the loss of rights, of access. We are grieving an aspect of a community that we thought we held dear. When we see greater political divides, as people would put it, we're grieving the fact that we don't have a community that's united on certain fronts. And I think that hurts on a much more fundamental level because we crave connection. We crave community. We all want a village as a fundamental structure of our aspect and being. And so when we see disagreement, not just because we personally disagree and someone else's opinion doesn't vibe with mine, but when we witness disagreement, when we witness conflict, when we witness war, I think it inherently chafes not just on our moral compass, but it chafes at our inherent need to want to belong in a community, to want to be seen, to want to be witnessed. There is a desire for agreement over discord when we think about what will keep me safe, what will make me feel peaceful, what will make me feel loved. It rarely is war. When I witness war, I don't feel loved. It's that simple. So if I want to feel loved, like I belong, like my needs are being met, and I witness discord and disagreement, or when I'm reminded of the fact that the community is not in alignment, that it is divided in some way, not only does it reflect the inner divide within myself, but it makes me feel less safe in that community because I don't feel like there's as good of a chance of being seen. I feel like I'm only going to be seen and witnessed and held by half of the population, say, versus the other half of the population. And that hurts. And that pain becomes grief when we realize that the only way out is through. There's something unsalvageable in our definition of grief, like there's something that I'm losing and I cannot get back, that makes grief much more poignant than simple pain, right? Pain can be temporary. It's the difference between an injury that we know will heal because it's superficial and the loss of a limb or some other traumatic injury that feels like it's going to change the entire way we live our lives. And there are so many things in life that allow you to witness that, especially if you're going through a transition. I've talked about the downsides of grief, but I also want to give hope because grief, I do believe, is transformative. It can be transmuted into joy, into pleasure, because remembrance can be an active practice full of joy, not just a somber one full of regret and mourning. If you've ever heard of this analogy of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, we talk about this a lot when it comes to transformation, personal growth, going through life changes, how delightful, and we forget that an aspect of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly isn't just this beautiful transformation. There's a point where the caterpillar literally traps itself in a freaking cocoon and disintegrates, turns itself into goo, literal gross goo, and then reconstitutes itself so that it can become a butterfly. But if you were to tell the caterpillar, hey, you're not turning into a butterfly, I just need you to step into this very small container here and turn into goo and disintegrate, no biggie. If that's all we sold people on, caterpillars would probably not buy into the desire of becoming butterflies, right? So there has to be a light at the end of this tunnel when we talk about grief, because I understand if I say, hey, embrace the goo, that's a little toxic positivity for you because it's not fun. Grief sucks. The reason grief is so powerful, and this is true for burnout as well. So if you're like, Helen, I'm not grieving anything. Okay, but if you've ever burned out, this is also true. I might talk about the benefits of burnout in another episode, but there are a lot of similarities to the potential in the growth of grief as well as the learnings and benefits of burning out. Notably, that when you have lost something, you are forced to reckon with feelings, emotions, facts that maybe were not as front and center as they were before. It is going to unconsciously and consciously bring up a whole bunch of stuff, beliefs, upset, anger, all of these emotions, and you get to let them float up to the surface. If you try to repress them, they will show up years later, either when you blow up at someone else or they're going to manifest in your body later as discomfort or disease. Like, it's not good to suppress emotion. And when you let that emotion up and out and through and you feel it, not only does it give you a chance to be vulnerable with others and connect and build community over something we can all deeply understand, which is a desire for connection that we no longer have, the desire for purpose, right? The desire for a home that we are leaving behind. We can all deeply resonate with that on some level. And so grief allows you to connect with others through that lens. Grief also allows you to connect more deeply with yourself. You get vulnerable with yourself and realize, oh my God, this thing that I'm walking away from was actually really important to me. And you get to inquire, why? Why was this thing so important to me at the time? What values of mine did it represent? What about this thing did I love so dearly? Even though it's the best decision for me to walk away from it, what about it did I love? What about me in that environment did I love? What about me in that environment did I not enjoy? Right? And this might be easier for you to picture if you think about like an emotional relationship breakup, right? Like, there's a version of you that chose to be in that relationship. There's a version of you that loved being in that relationship and that loved that other person. And maybe there are aspects of your personality that got fleshed out when you were with that person, that there was a part of you that was more easy to explore. And I'm sure there was also a part of them that inspired you, that made you laugh, that, made you feel safe. And so even in those good things that you're walking away from, it's showing you what's important to you. It's telling you what you can incorporate and look for, especially if it's positive, in future relationships. What you can cling to and emphasize in your own personality. What aspects of yourself maybe didn't get a spotlight shown on them until you stepped onto the stage of that relationship. So the positive things can tell you what to emphasize and focus on and prioritize moving forward. And then the negative things also provide information. They tell you all the reasons you walked away, maybe all the signs you didn't notice before, the aspects of yourself maybe that showed up that didn't flatter you in the moment, that you weren't really proud of, right? It calls into question all of the little habits that we engage in day to day that we don't notice until something big happens and knocks us on our ass. And that's been kind of the theme for the last 3 episodes, right? Like there is something that life is going to do that is beyond our control. And it's in those moments that we are forced to reckon with not only how we feel about our interaction with the environment, but how we feel about ourselves. And that information is invaluable. And grief allows you to transmute all of that through deep, deep feelings and learn about yourself and apply those lessons to every other aspect of your life. The most powerful example for me was the loss of my mom, because that was the first time that I was forced by circumstance to be vulnerable. I had up to that point completely denied my own vulnerability personally. I would never cry in front of anyone. I was definitely the person that sought to help others. I was the strong one, as my friends would put it. And what that meant, unfortunately, is when my mom passed away, there was no one around to support me. And later, my friends told me, they were like, Hélène, one, we're sorry, but two, we did not know what to do because you had always been the strong one, and we did not know how to support you because we had never practiced that before. And so I learned so much from the loss of my mom, not because she was no longer there, but because of what it activated and triggered in me, a side of myself that I don't think I would have seen unless something like that would have happened. Because at the time, there was no one more important to me in my life than my mom. There was no one I thought of as family more than my mom. She was my best friend. And so when I lost such a huge person, I also lost a huge safety net, a huge part of myself, a connection, the version of me that she and only she got to see. So what I got to learn the hard way is how to be all those versions of myself that only she got to see, the vulnerable, sad, scared, angry parts of me. How could I be that version of myself in front of other people in my life? How did I learn how to ask for help? How could I learn how to be soft and gentle? How could I learn to teach other people how to help me? What did I love most about my mom? How could I embody those attributes more, right? How could I use the positive projections onto her personality and incorporate them into my day-to-day life? What are the things that drove me crazy about my relationship with my mom? What, if any, of those qualities were still within me, right? What habits did she have that drove me nuts that I'm still exhibiting today? What aspects of her frustrated me? How do I frustrate myself? The happy ending, as it were, to this grief is, now I find myself that much more vulnerable with people. And when I tell them I used to struggle with vulnerability, it's been so long that people don't realize it. Strangers who meet me don't realize that I was ever someone who wasn't vulnerable or wasn't willing to cry in public. And it's been a long journey to get here. And it required asking for help. And it required a support system and connections with other people. And so now when I go to remember my mom, it doesn't have to look like any special ceremony. It looks like me dressing in a way that I take pride in. It looks like me embodying self-expression. She was a huge cheerleader and encouraged people very deeply. And so every time I am helpful to someone by just witnessing and cheering them on, I know I'm remembering my mom. That is quite literally what I mean when I talk about transmuting grief. I took the best things about this person that I had lost and loved, and I asked myself what aspects of them or of myself came out in that relationship that I loved and adored. And I decided to turn those on and ratchet that up a little bit higher, the intensity of those things higher, and be more intentional about showing up that way in life. So I found myself literally helping people. So much so, a couple years ago, I was moving again from one place to another to a new city, and I found some of her old belongings. And I'd found an old business plan that she had written for a business that she was just starting for herself as a want-to-be entrepreneur. And I looked at it, and so much of what she had written was something that I had written in my own business plan, something that she had never known about, that I had never known about, and we ended up writing on the same values, on the same principle of trying to help people, on trying to allow folks from diverse backgrounds to communicate more effectively, on helping people feel more seen, heard, and understood, especially in corporate settings. And I don't think that's just kismet. I do think that's a byproduct of being so intentional in learning about not just myself, about my mom, but every other experience of grief that had befallen me up until that point, and choosing to feel my way through. So I'll leave you with one of my favorite analogies when it comes to change, when it comes to loss, when it comes to grief. Right? And that is this notion that every season, the leaves of the tree fall down, but the tree doesn't die. Right? The leaves fall down, but the tree doesn't die. And so it's not our place to judge and shame and call that winter tree any uglier, any less beautiful for having let its leaves fall. Those leaves have to fall for new growth to arise. In the previous episode, I mentioned how scary it is to admit when we're unhappy. One of the reasons is because we're going to have to grieve all of that on the way to the happiness that we're looking for. Right? We genuinely have to grieve the garden that we have not watered or tended to walk towards the greener pasture. So whether you're changing a habit, a relationship, contemplating quitting your job, moving to a new city, one of the reasons you might be resisting that change or confronting it fully is because you have grief to process that once you do will allow you to see the situation with more clarity. It's not just admitting you're unhappy, it's admitting where your disappointment comes from. It's grieving the version of you that thought that everything was going to turn out beautifully and recognizing, shit, it didn't. And so it's not just admitting that you're not where you want to be, it's grieving the version of you that worked so fucking hard to get there that doesn't get to get her happy ending. But she got you as far as you could go, so this version of you can go chase a different version of that happy ending. So consider in your life right now, where if at all might you be grieving? And what grief, if any, are you afraid to feel? If you were to be grieving something right now, what emotion would you need to feel next? Name that thing, feel that thing, and then decide what you want to take with you moving forward. I promise you there is a light at the end of this tunnel. You are not alone. Reach out if you want support directly. This has been What the Hélène. I'll see you on the next episode.